Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. A lot has happened in the Russia-Ukraine war in the past some time, and I thought I'll just try and do a little bit of a roundup of the situation. What is happening in that entire region of the world with the sabotage, so-called, of the Nord Stream 2 or the Nord Stream pipelines, which has taken place? What is going to be the future of this Ukraine conflict? There is just so much happening in this particular region. The referendums have taken place. And of course, a big news which is coming out just before I went on live is that President Zelensky now talks about joining the NATO. And as a matter of fact, he's signed a paper stating that he will now become a contractual member of the NATO. It is a very, very interesting time. It is a very dangerous time, if I may, because this whole situation can spiral out of control without anybody realizing what is actually going to take place and what is happening. Now, to discuss this entire situation, I have made up a small presentation which I want to discuss. I want to show you all. Let's just hit on to that and see where the situation is today and how is it to go forward. Before that, guys, let me request all of you, please do like and subscribe this channel. Like this particular video, share this video with people that you think will be interested in the whole Russia-Ukraine conflict and the whole geopolitical situation coming out of Europe. It's going to be a bad cold winter for Europe going forward. And of course, yes, please do, during the presentations, please do make your comments, make your questions so that we can go through them by the end of the show. And of course, if you can, do contribute to the Dev Talks efforts through UPI, or you can become a member by clicking join somewhere down there. And of course, there is also the thanks button that you can hit to send me a super chat or a super sticker. Having said that, let's hit on to the presentation to see what I've kind of prepared for you. Uh, the main things that we are seeing right now is let's look at the month of September. It was a month of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, if you would like to put it that way. I spoke to General Hasnain, who called it a repost operation, where the Ukrainians tried to kind of push back the Russians in places of concentration so that to break up a potential Russian attack. And this to me sounds very, very interesting because if you guys remember, about a month ago, during the start of the Kherson offensive, I had mentioned that the Russians are preparing for some sort of an offensive in the northeast of the region. Let's see. Now, couple of facts about the Nord Stream before we actually go forward. And I'm not going to go into the history and this and that. It's just a little bit. Project started in 1998 and the inauguration of the Pipe 1. Now, remember one thing, that these two pipes have basically a Pipe A and Pipe B in Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 as well. Nord Stream 2, of course, was never commissioned. We will talk about that. The inauguration was done on the 8th of November 2011, and the second pipe was done on the 8th of October 2012. If you remember, Angela Merkel and that time the Russian leader Dmitry Medvedev and all these guys had gotten together and actually pushed the button to switch on this pipeline. The Nord Stream 2 started in 2011 to be inaugurated in 2022, but 3 days before the start of the war. This is at the time where these two breakaway republics declared their independence. German Chancellor refused to certify this entire pipeline. Now, what has happened? There have been four explosions till now. This was picked up by Swedish seismologists as up to about 2.2 on the Richter scale, if I'm not mistaken. Four explosions. It can be repaired. That's what a lot of people, a lot of experts have to say. But will it be? Is a big question. This particular attack or this particular sabotage really touches upon a civilian infrastructure which is outside the war zone of Ukraine. And that is very, very critical for us to understand because it expands the entire war effort or the war as per se with outside the Ukrainian borders. Now, that is a very dangerous place which we are going to. As far as the civilian infrastructure is concerned, we also know about the attack of civilian infrastructure which is being carried out on the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. We had the IAEA guys go there. They had an attack during that time, and we also know the fact that this particular plant is held up by the Russians since the month of March. So who was shelling it? This whole thing I find to be very reckless in the middle of a war. Let's talk about this whole sabotage. When we do an investigation, there are three things that I'd like to look at, and this is what I've done in this presentation. Look at the intent, look at the capability, and look at the factor who gains from these sabotage, attacks, sabotage, or whatever you may like to call it. Who done it? Let's look at Europe first. The Nordic states. The Nordic states have just, as a matter of fact, opened a new pipeline just a day after this leak was reported. This pipeline is going to connect Norway into Poland and supply it with gas. Of course, not the same quantity that the Russians were able to do it, but it is still on. They might have an intent of being anti-Russia, but the capability of these states is highly questionable. Now, when I say capability, one of the things that we need to understand, you may want to do something like this, but please understand these pipes run about 200 to 300 feet deep in the ocean. It is very difficult for an individual or a group of individuals to go down and do something like that. These things are made with reinforced concrete, and on top of it, it has got reinforced steel, which actually carries the gas inside. So damaging these things is not that easy. Let's talk about the UK for a minute. The intent, of course, the UK has been dead against Russia since the war has started. Capability, yes, the UK has a very strong naval presence within the European region, but the practical gain for the UK is very little. Remember one thing, the UK is still, in spite of the Brexit, is still very heavily connected to the European market, and one must understand that any sort of damage that will go on to Europe and its economy will also affect the UK pretty badly. Let's talk about Poland, which is an interesting player. It has been vehemently opposed Russia. It has been wholeheartedly supporting Ukraine in its war effort. Good, bad, or ugly is a different discussion. The intent, yes, they have the intent. Capability, questionable, but the Polish could provide a huge amount of local support as the Polish borders this particular region, the sea. Gain, of course, yes. I would like to take the gain a little later because there is a big question mark with regards to what Poland actually gains from this entire thing. We know that the Polish have been smart enough of actually holding up some amount of gas for their reserves. They were at about 90-95% at about a month and a half or two ago. How much have they been able to maintain it right now is something which is a question. But of course, with them having established a direct pipeline coming in from Norway, I'm sure they have a little bit of ease with regards to their gas requirements this winter. Let's talk about Germany, which is the most interesting conversation I want to have. And as a matter of fact, the first point, if you read, it says Germany loses the most, and that is absolutely true. The German economy has taken a beat. For the first time. They've crossed, uh, double-digit inflation. It is going down the tubes. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of pressure which is coming on the Olaf Scholz government with regards to the economic backturn. I'll talk about some stuff which has happened in Germany in the past couple of days as we go forward. Now, Germany has, played a very, very hesitant role, if I may say, during the war in Ukraine. It has been refusing, as I've written here, wholeheartedly to support the military, uh, you know, donation, if I may, to the Ukrainians. I don't know if you guys remember the 5,000 helmets at the beginning of the war that was given by the Germans, and it didn't go down well with a lot of the Ukrainian supporters and Ukrainians themselves. The Ukraine ambassador to Germany at one time, he's now been removed, called the Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, an offended liver sausage. So one can actually imagine. Uh, there is a NYT New York Times article that I've just screenshot and put there, which talks about Germany's chancellor has a lot for Ukraine, but no battle tanks. As I said, Germany has been a very reluctant player in terms of providing for Ukraine the weapons that it needs to fight this particular battle. Uh, Protests have been ongoing in Germany since the war has begun. With regards to the whole economic policy, it talks about. As a matter of fact, some of the protesters have actually mentioned switch on Nord Stream 2, and this was very, very clearly there. I'd like to keep this discussion of switching on the Nord Stream 2 again for a little bit. So there are two things we've put on a pin. One is Poland, and the second is switching on the German calls for switching on the Nord Stream 2. Let's move forward. As I say, Germans know the general winter better than anybody else. Let me assure you, with the recent, or I would say, tentatively recent exposure of their armies in the Second World War. I'm sure history travels. Interestingly, Angela Merkel, who seems like the adult in the room, and somebody mentioned that on the Dev Talks WhatsApp group some time back, uh, said that Angela Merkel says that European security architecture must include Russia. Now, she has been at the forefront of relations with Russia. She's had very good relations with Putin. Both of them speak the same language, German. She's, trying. I'm sure she's probably trying and figuring out how to balance this entire situation. Let's look at the three factors that I want to talk about. Intent, Germany. I don't think so. It's absolutely doubtful that they would want to commit self suicide after what is happening in their country. Capability, no. Remember, the German capability is what the Americans provide the Germans. So they don't have much of their own in terms of carrying out such a very, very sophisticated operation. And they absolutely do not gain from this entire sabotage that has taken place of these pipelines. Then who? Big question. I'm sure a lot of you by now or by yourselves have come up with a derivative as to who is responsible for something like this. Who is responsible for ensuring that this war will not come to an end? Who is responsible for ensuring that escalation ladder that was being maintained at a certain level may just break? Let's move forward. Right. Some noticeable facts that came out, and I was talking to you about Poland. So let's pin out that discussion. And here we have Poland's former foreign minister of the European Parliament, Radoslaw Sikorski. I'm sorry for the pronunciation of his name. On Thursday, removed his Twitter tweet that he had made out, thanking the United States for damaging the Nord Stream and the Nord Stream 2 gas pipelines. Later on, of course, as I said, he deleted it. Now, Poland and Germany for the past some time have been sparring quite a bit. And this is interesting when NATO members kind of fight with each other. There's another fight which is brewing between Turkey and Greece, where France has said that I will help them. But, anyways, let's get back to this. Poland and Germany have been openly sparring on the World War II reparations. The Polish feel that the Germans still owe them a lot of money in terms of trillions and trillions of dollars. Let me tell you that the Germans were not very happy about it, because the Germans turned around and said that if you want to talk about reparations, let's talk about the land which is predominantly German that was given to you after the Second World War. We will stake a claim to that. So there's a little bit of a tension between these two regions. And Polish, for that matter, have been the biggest supporters of Ukraine in Europe. I guess it's inexplicable, because the whole right wing movement in Ukraine, which was prevalent even during and after the Second World War, damaged the Polish quite a bit. And I don't want to get into what all actually happened, because we're on YouTube, and I would not want to mention these particular factors. They are a little away from the guidelines of YouTube. But one can actually read about what all happened in Poland after the Second World War. Let's move forward. There was an operation, or there was an exercise that the Americans were conducting. This was in the month of July. As I've said, this is a NATO website screenshot that I've taken. It was called Baltops 22. It was a perfect, as mentioned here, opportunity for research and testing new technology. What was the new technology? The new technology was unmanned underwater drones for doing various things. that the US wanted it to do. So this has actually happened. And as a matter of fact, these exercises were conducted around the same region where this particular incident has taken place. Interestingly, 2 days ago, the US Air Force was also conducting certain exercises within the Baltic, and this has been widely reported and not, being pushed across. There has been reports about efforts to damage or conduct a sabotage operation within the Nord Stream. I think in 2015, the Nord Stream had uh, got in touch with the Swedish Navy and asked them to remove a drone uh, of an unknown origin that was lying close to the Nord Stream pipeline with about a certain amount of explosive attached to it. And that was a dangerous situation at that time, but it kind of blew over and people don't talk about it anymore. Let's move forward. Some questions I have. You know, in terms of Europe, let's look at Europe, which is basically, so this is a European war uh, in my thought process. Let's look at Europe. Now we've got the three major powers in Europe which combine to make the European Union. First and foremost is, of course, Germany, which is backed heavily by the US. Then you've got the French, and then you've got the Italians. Let's eliminate from the bottom. Italians have changed their government to a person who's pretty much, I won't say pro Russia, but I guess her statements from the past talk about her affiliation and her understanding of the Russian aspect. Maybe, may not be. Let's talk about France. Well, Macron is the only person that has been able to, not recently, of course, successfully, but previously has been able to actually have a communication with Putin about this entire thing. So that is something that we must consider. The third part, which is the biggest economy, is Germany. And as I said, German support towards this entire war has been wavering. Now, let me say this very, very clearly. To some, a big, great power, this particular wavering support is troublesome. I'm sure all of you will understand what I'm trying to say. You know, the Germans have been talking about the Nord Stream, which could have been switched on, which basically resolves all their problems in terms of their energy crisis. It talks about, bilaterally, the Germans and the Russians could actually just talk and get this pipeline switched on. What would the EU do? Germany is the EU. I mean, there will be some verbal condemnations and some this and that, but who's going to do much? There was an option for doing something like that. The big question I want to ask is, has this been done to remove whatever little leverage that the Russians had in Europe? Why I say this? Remember, even now as we speak, a certain amount of gas was coming to Germany from Nord Stream 1. They were using Russian gas even now, and that gas was going to various different countries. That, of course, provided Russia with a certain amount of leverage, as we've seen Russians being having used that. It was the supply was brought down to 40%, then 20%, and there was this whole tam jam about those turbines and this and that, and the whole story. And I've covered this in my previous video of the Kherson offensive. Again, the big question, has this been done to keep Germany in the game? Because please understand, today, when something like this happens, the Germans have no place to go in terms of looking at an alternative supply. Will they take it from Poland, who have actually mentioned about the reparations? Will they take it from the US, who today, incidentally, becomes the second largest supplier of CNG in the world? God knows how far this whole thing will be able to be sustained. And as I said, NATO exercises that have been taking place in that particular region. Now, before I go to my next slide, which is about what's happening on the battlefield in Ukraine, I want to talk about certain other things. I mentioned about Poland. Now, Poland may not directly be able to do something like this, but with support, and Poland could provide for a lot of ground support for any operation of this kind that needs to be conducted. Certain questions again come out, which I have kind of not mentioned here, and I'd like to ask them. One, how is it that something like this happens and the entire world is basically talking about the referendums? So the timing of this entire attack or the sabotage has been planned out very, very well. This could have been done months ago. I mean, why is it right now? There are two, three reasons: general winter, referendums, you know, media blitz, just create an optics. There are a lot of things that we might not be able to put our finger onto, but something seems to be a little miss. And I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist. I'm just trying to read what I can see in the news. I am trying to put two and two together. The timing does not seem right. This, to me, has been done to ensure one, Germany support towards Ukraine is kept alive, and two, the referendums should be pushed down. I will talk about the referendums as I go on. I've got about another 5-7 minutes of the presentation, 5-7-10 minutes of the presentation to show you guys. But remember one thing: nothing of this sort will happen for a reason. And if somebody is going to turn around and say this is a natural disaster that is taking place, well, four leaks in two separate pipelines in the gap of 24 hours, as they say, there's an old adage: if it happens once, it's an incident. If it happens the second time, it's a coincidence. If it happens the third time, it is sabotage. And that is exactly, this is the fourth time it has happened. So there's something wrong. Right? So, what am I trying to get at? What would this great power gain out of doing something like this? Gain out of attacking its own ally? Remember one thing: the US, which I presume is the great power, and I'm not trying to point any fingers, let's look at it from that. The US spent about 40 to 50 years building up the European Union, building up the economy of Germany. Why would they do something like that to Germany to bring their economy back down into the ground? Well, you can ask the same question: why would the entire European Union follow through with these sanctions, which they know are being bad for themselves? These are big questions. What is the leverage that this great power has over the European Union, that it can make itself commit suicide, if in no simple words? Right. That is what I wanted to say about the Nord Stream, and I think you guys would be able to pick up what I'm trying to say. And I don't want to point fingers, because there is no evidence to this particular factor. There is no news article, there is no photograph, or there's nothing which has been mentioned. And of course, lastly, I'd like to say something about this particular subject. The West has been very, very fast enough of coming out and saying that the Russians did it. Now, let's get back to my last point here. Let's get back to the three things that I want to talk about. One, the intent. Do the Russians have intent of damaging their own pipeline? Remember, the Russians have always been wanting to be a part of the European community. Would they do something like this to break away ties and remove any leverage that they have over Europe? Doubtful. Capability. Of course, the Russians do have the capability of doing something like this. But as some of you might know, some of you might not, I'd like to tell you, the Baltic Sea is normally known as a NATO sea. Why would the Russians want to go and do something like that in the Baltics under the nose of NATO? It's a big question. And the third would be, would Russia gain from it? Absolutely not. The Russian economy, as we all know, is not taken a beat as what the Westerners are talking about. But yes, it has taken some sort of a hit. It has gone down by about 4.5%. I mean, they still need money. They don't have a printing press or something like that. The Russians don't produce that much. They produce weapons, they produce oil, and some sort of other technology, high technology services. It's not much. So if they are going to cut off this particular thing, it's going to be a problem. And this was also a negotiating point that the Russians would have had for themselves. Right. So now I want to go back and I want to study what's happening in Ukraine. Now, this is a map. I normally don't refer to this particular map, because I have now realized the source of this map has been very highly affiliated towards Ukraine. I want to rather kind of focus myself onto something which is a bit more neutral. But anyways, let's just look at this. The major fighting which is happening is in the eastern part, towards the cities of Bakhmut, towards the city of Liman, which the Ukrainians have been attacking. So Ukrainians have been attacking in the northern part of Donbass, which is the city of Liman, and the Russians have been continuing with their operations in the southern part of Donbass, which is close to Bakhmut, and going forward. I would not say southern, but I would say south eastern part of Donbass, where this city is located. Remember, Bakhmut is a big hub center of Ukrainian defense, and as a matter of fact, during the time where uh, the whole offensive had started off in the Donbass, the Ukrainian President Zelensky had, as a matter of fact, visited this entire place, and it was much publicized. The offensive in Kherson doesn't seem to be going much, and I will show you where what all has been reoccupied as per se by the Ukrainians, which comes here. Now, I'm sure you can see the purple parts, which is the basically the reoccupation, if I may, of the Ukrainian forces of the territories that were occupied by Russia. So the so-called counter-offensive, the major one, which of course all of us know, has happened in Kharkiv in the north, and which was supposed to be a big, huge offensive in the Kherson region, has not really, mounted to much. This was again a mistake that the Russians had made. They had put a lot of focus on towards Kherson and left the north unguarded, and I think that's what this has happened. A lot of the channels, and I've got comments where people are telling me to follow certain channels who talk about this particular thing, have tried to portray this particular thing as a organized Russian withdrawal. I don't think so. The Russians got routed. They did not look at this particular offensive coming in the north, and they paid for it. That is just about it. Because if the Russians still say that the Kharkiv region is predominantly Russian speaking, why would they leave this entire place? So there was a mistake that was made by the Russians, and there is nothing to be hiding that about. Right, let's move forward. These are the regions where the erstwhile Ukrainian regions, if I may, where today the referendums have come into place. And President Putin, just before my live show started up, had put out, a video and a talk about and some photographs about the whole signing up of these territories, and he's declared all the people living in this region as Russians, and it the duty and responsibility of the Russian state to protect them. This is an interesting move, I must say. The Russians have actually gone ahead and won a battle where they probably took a beat in the same month. This was a very daring move by the Russians to actually conduct these referendums, knowing very well that there's going to be a lot of backlash coming their way. They did it, and they've got what the results were, which were not doubted, as a matter of fact, and they are where they are today, with these four regions coming back into so-called Mother Russia. What will be the future of the war now? That's an interesting question. Of course, this is the photograph that has been put out by the Kremlin. Now, let's talk about the peace or the end of the war, if there is any. What I want to talk about here is what's going to happen. Put the Nord Stream incident. Put the incident now. Of course, the news about President Zelensky wanting to join NATO and him signing that paper had happened just had happened before I started this live and after I'd made this presentation. So I haven't been able to put that in. But that is the first point. Any chances of peace? Remember, it's one of the stated objectives of the Russian Federation is about preventing Ukraine from joining NATO. Today, the Ukraine is as close as NATO as it ever was. So, this particular area, I find the Russians have not been able to achieve their objective. Right. Any chances of peace? Let's get back to this. The Saudis have been trying to do some negotiations, and we know the Saudis were able to get out certain prisoners of war, which were basically termed as mercenaries, and some of them were given death sentences within the DPR and the LPR. These guys were brought out and they were sent into Saudi Arabia. So he was able to actually, get a certain result out of his effort. But I'd like to also say this: the Prime Minister, MBS, who was just made Prime Minister a couple of days ago, is also solidifying his position after the Jamal Khashoggi incident. And he was, if you remember, probably segregated or secluded from the international community for a little while. There were those famous G20 photographs where he was kept alone. But he might be doing this to put himself back on the world stage. So there is sort of a personal ambition here. Right, counterbalancing the West. The Saudis have been actually realizing that too much dependence on the West is actually not giving them a lot of what they wanted to do. So they've been also looking at counterbalancing themselves, and we saw this during the Joe Biden's visit to Saudi Arabia, where when asked about increasing the oil production, he had said, "I will go back to OPEC plus and discuss it." Guess who's plus? Russia. And of course, the Saudi ambitions to join BRICS. Erdogan is also been trying to mediate, but I don't think people trust him. I mean, he's been shooting all around the place. He's, as a matter of fact, said that he'll never recognize these referendums. So I don't think the Russians would trust him. They would entertain him, they would talk to him, they would do all that stuff, but I don't think he would be able to carry on such a huge responsibility. The Germans, in my view, could have been the answer for peace. The German government itself was on a teetering edge. If something would have happened in Germany in terms of a change of government, there was a huge chance that the Germans would have pushed for peace. It was as simple as opening a pipeline, as a matter of fact. Today, will that happen? With the Russian leverage gone, with the Germans knowing that these pipelines are useless? I don't know. The Russians are also mobilizing 300,000 people, 300,000 battle experienced troops. There's a lot of news media which is talking about Russians running away from here, there, and everywhere. I'd like to take all of that with a pinch of salt, and all of the whole thing with a pinch of salt, because remember one thing: Russia is as much as a free country as anybody else. Uh, People can do whatever they want to. Yes, there is a certain control that the government has over the Russian people, but there are no controls in terms of running around and doing all sorts of things that they want to do. Mobilization is happening. 300,000, as Putin said, these are people who are combat trained. It's going to be a big challenge for the Ukrainians, for the first time will be outnumbered in this battle. The next major operation would take place. As a matter of fact, today, what I see the Russians trying to adjust their ground with the so called Ukrainian counteroffensive, which is taking place in the northeast, is basically to ensure not to get stuck in the mud. Let me be very, very clear. This is the time for rains and this is the time for mud. It's called Rasputitsa. It's basically called General Mud. And I think me and General Shankar have actually referred to this particular thing in one of our discussions. And also, General Winter comes in when the ground freezes up. Remember, General Winter plays on the side of Russia. The American midterm elections are coming in. The Americans would be looking at Joe Biden to kind of show what he's done, spending 63 or I think $65 billion into Ukraine, where today there's a massive hurricane that has hit Florida, and I don't know how much help has been able to be provided in terms of a comparative to Ukraine and Florida. The nuclear threats are on the table. There is sheer evidence that both the sides have been pushing not pushing the nuclear button, but pushing the nuclear envelope, and that is a dangerous preposition. And I really don't understand where all this is coming from. Now the big question: who will stick their neck in this entire mess? Well, a lot of talk was there then that India should do it. Why should India? It's such a messy affair. Look what they're doing to themselves. Why would India want to do something like that? I don't think so. At one point of time, I think I've particularly mentioned in this particular channel that I want to see India try and make an effort towards bring a peace to this entire thing. I don't think so. I don't think so anymore. I think I'm going to take my words back. Firstly, thanks Gurmeet for that super chat. People in the Western countries don't hate Russia, just its politics. People here don't care about anyone at all. They care about themselves and their communities. Well, Gurmeet, I think I'm going to take that point. The policies, yes, there is a lot of differences between the policies. I'm sure Russia has made its own mistakes. There is no question about it. Having said that, I've written an article and I put it out there. It's written in the Financial Times. The kind of degradation of the Russian leadership that is taking place, is something which is going to make it very difficult for leaders to sit together and talk. I want to take you back to the ages of Ronald Reagan, who had called the Soviet Union an evil empire, and that thing stuck with him for the rest of his life. I mean, he had to take back his words standing in front of Mikhail Gorbachev. And those were days of rhetoric. Today is not the day of rhetoric. Today is the day of social media where everything just flies around. And your second point, where they care about themselves and their communities, well, I don't know where you're based, but it certainly doesn't seem so in Europe. It is interesting what the Europeans are doing to themselves. That's all I would say. How much time Europe can sustain itself with costly American oil, and how will Venezuela play a role? Well, the Americans, as I said, have become the second largest supplier of CNG in the world. American oil is going to be costly because there's going to be more requirement. With the issues happening in Iran, I don't think Iran's stabilization seems coming in anytime soon. Venezuela has been tried, but I guess the Venezuelan problem, till the time the Americans don't take a decision, it will not move forward. And that is something that I'm realizing. And with the current sort of setup in America, the decisions are not with the view of comforting the world, with the view of a very, very narrow-minded hegemonic reactions which are taking place in America. And that's just my opinion. You may disagree with me. Let me know if you think I'm not on the point. Can you make a video on the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict and what role India can play in it? Absolutely, I'll do that. I've done a bit of a talk with General Shokin Chauhan quite a while ago about the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and the role that the drones had played in that particular conflict. As far as India is concerned, I think 200 or I'm not sure of the number. There's a certain amount of weapons, which is a certain large number of weapons that are being given to the Armenians, which include the Pinaka, multiple barrel launched rockets. So that's going to be an interesting development. Uh, Next, Mandar says, I think the Europeans don't want a war while the Anglo Saxons want one. Well, yeah, if the Europeans don't want war, they would have to come up and put that across because it doesn't seem so in terms of what they're talking about. It doesn't seem so with all the rhetoric that is coming out of there. It doesn't seem so with the kind of decisions that they are taking. It seems that they are stuck, and that is something I can see. Please look at Olaf Scholz's statement with regards to this whole thing, and we can now see Angela Merkel coming out and saying what she's saying is going to be a. I don't think the Europeans have the capacity to sustain something like this. I think Sandeep mentioned America. I think it's one of those Twitter trends where he just mentioned one word. I agree with you, but the reasoning behind the Americans doing something like this is something I'm not able to comprehend. Apart from just keeping the Germans at a bit of a teetering edge and keeping the Germans together with them, I don't see any other benefit. And why would they do something like this? Remember one thing: this is not a one-man show. This is not two people going down and putting a grenade under a pipe. It's a very hellishly sophisticated operation that needs to be done very carefully. So it may just come out one day, and we'll have to just wait and watch. Nord Stream 1 pipeline may use repair equipment pool. Yes, sir. I think I read that. Uh, they are going to try and repair it, but let's see if the Russians agree to it. It's a big question. Ame says, yes, the timing is perfect. Yeah, of course, the timing was perfect. Referendum, pipeline goes boom, there's divided media attention. A lot of effort is being put across to cover the referendums and the Western condemnation to kind of keep the Nord Stream thing away. Judge it for yourselves. Right. US is known to keep even its allies under pressure solely to fulfill its own strategies, interests in the region. I agree with you, sir. Look at what the US is doing to India and Pakistan. Look at the $450 million, which has been given, to my mind, to Pakistan with regards to uh, updating, if I may, their F-16 fleet. And Minister Jaishankar was very, very clear in saying is we don't fool anybody. I don't think anybody is fooled with regards to this. It's a clear and subtle message, which was, I think, rebutted to by our foreign minister very well. But of course, as I think a lot of people have mentioned in my program, my various programs, is US, one needs to be very careful when we are dealing with them, because it's our national interest that we need to see. So I'll actually just flip that towards the Indian side and actually use it. When Russia has a switch to on and off, why would it blow its own pipeline? Exactly what I'm saying, sir. Why would they do this? This was their leverage within the European Union. This was their leverage with Germany, which was the biggest power in Europe. Why would they do something like that? It defies logic. Is Kharkiv route primarily due to Russia pushing conscripts? So the Kharkiv offensive, let me just say this, what happened was the Russians, I think, bought over into this whole narrative of this Kherson offensive, and we saw a lot of equipment going down south rather than maintaining their lines on top. And their lines on top were pretty badly manned. And let me assure you, a lot of channels will tell you that this was some sort of a strategic pullback and this and that. It was not. The Russians had to run. There's no question about it. They did not plan that entire thing. They were not able to sustain it. And let me tell you this, there's been a lot of condemnation within Russia who's upset about leaving its brothers and sisters in Kharkiv. There are a lot of people. Please look at the videos coming out of Izium, where people are actually having a fight with each other as to who ate Russian food. So if you think this was planned, well, I have a bridge to sell. 80 billion now sent to Ukraine. Of course, yeah, that number it's crazy. If India is smart and does not put its head in its game, well, you know what, India, I don't think we need to get into this entire thing. uh, I don't think we need to even talk about this entire thing apart from what has been mentioned officially. I don't think the government of India should put its head into this murky game. This is absolutely a place where allies are now beginning to undermine each other. You can imagine what can happen to a third bystander. I have a last comment. Could you elaborate a little about the command structure of the Russian Air Force? I'm not privy to the Ukrainian Air Force structure. I think we have done a CICT operations with them as well. Yes, we have. As a matter of fact, the Russian Air Force structure basically is divided into their theater commands. They've got integrated battle groups that they work with, and each theater command is responsible for that particular area. There's a certain amount of aircraft, and so basically air armies they call it, which are attached to these particular units, and they operate within their region of operations. The Ukrainian Air Force, let me tell you, at the start of the war, whatever the Ukrainian Air Force was there has ceased to exist. They probably have 5-10 of their aircraft left around here and there, which they're using, but the Ukrainian Air Force, as per se, has ceased to exist. What we see flying around today are old Polish, Slovakian, and Estonian, and probably many other Soviet time aircraft that are being given to Ukraine on the sly. Remember, and this is something that General Hasnain has brought out in my show very many times, that the entire western border of Ukraine has been left open by the Russians. Why they're doing something like that is besides me, but these are the facts. The West has been able to supply the Ukrainians with weapons that it requires. And, I was listening to a couple of people who talk about the kind of weapons that have come in, and who also are very certain of the fact that the Ukrainian army, which started the battle, has ceased to exist, just like the Air Force that I have just spoken about. India has done a lot of exercises with the countries in that region. As a matter of fact, these are extensions of military diplomacy which takes place. India has been trying to do something like that. The Ukrainians used to be a huge supplier of Indian defense equipment in terms of, if you know, the Antonov aircraft, a lot of the spares come from there. A lot of engines for our naval vessels used to come from there. It's going to be a bit of a challenge with regards, sourcing these kind of things. I'm sure by now a lot of things have been streamlined or stabilized or produced in house, or whatever it may require. Guys, thank you so much for joining me for this show and putting out your thoughts. I just wanted to share this presentation with you This was not more of an interactive program, but I just took across some of your uh, questions and comments. It is okay. I think Varun wants to ask another question. What kind of weaponry has the US supplied? Well, the US has supplied everything and anything. Let me assure you, the US has supplied all Soviet made equipment to Ukraine. The US has supplied tanks. The US has supplied HIMARS, M777, which we also have in India, as a matter of fact. They have supplied weapons. There are rumors of the US paying the entire setup of the Ukrainian army, and the Ukrainians don't have money, as a matter of fact. Their inflation is bad. They're down to about 60% inflation uh, in their country, and around the same number of unemployed. So if somebody is saying that Ukraine is doing greatly well, nothing is happening, and this, it doesn't make sense. Excuse me. The US has actually supplied a lot of weapons. The question we must be asking is, what has the US supplied which has not been told to all of us? Which, in fact, is a matter of fact, as I've mentioned in one of my write ups that I had done, is also intelligence. The US is actively helping Ukraine identifying targets for the HIMARS attacks. I don't know if you guys remember initially about, some of these generals were, the Russian generals were taken out by the Ukrainians. How do you think that happened? One must ask this. Thank you, Mr. Venki, for this super sticker. I'm grateful. Uh, Guys, thank you so much for joining me. I wanted to keep this just the thing that I prepared. Although, if I write something like this, it may not be accepted in a place where I want to publicize, because it doesn't. I don't have evidence. Whatever evidences are there, I've given to you. All these, each one of these statements that I've put out, you can actually research. These are things which are already there as part of news, not reported by TASS or some Russian media or RT. These are news items that have been reported by the Western media. You can check each one of the things I've mentioned there. You can counterbalance it, and you can come back to me if I've gone wrong somewhere. Till next time, gentlemen, before I sign off, please do hit the like button, hit the subscribe. Please do share this channel with people. I'd like to grow. I've come up with your help to about 4,600 followers. It's a slow process for people who are doing serious discussions. I understand that, but I'll be grateful if you guys would help me grow in my endeavor. You can contribute to the Dev Talks effort by using the UPI and by clicking the join or the thanks button. And of course, don't forget to share your thoughts as far as the comments are concerned within the video. If you guys want to become a part of the Dev Talks WhatsApp group, do drop me a mail in the email ID mentioned on my channel. Till next time, guys, Jai Hind.